Picture this. You wake up one morning with a bad hangover. Your boy Bob Barbas is reporting about some weeb in a mask when you hear a knock at the door. You stumble over in your drunken state and answer it to see a little cutie who looks a bit like Alex from Half-Life 2 if she took cocaine. And then suddenly a friggin' demon rises out of the ocean like Cthulhu and he shoots his thing at you and you go flying and then pew 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 pew, dead. And then the little cutie drives up and offers you a ride. What do?
Please? I helped you back there.
Go with her to join up with your weeaboo twin brother in a globe-trotting adventure to kill the Demon Lord, obviously. That's what I like about Devil May Cry. It gets right into the action. No drawn-out tutorial sequence, no massive amount of filler or story setup, just a simple cutscene to... Wait a minute. I'm getting deja vu here. I thought I already reviewed Devil May Cry. What's going on? Oh, hold on. This isn't Devil May Cry. This is capital D, lowercase m, capital C, Devil May Cry. Now it all makes sense. Yes, sirree, this is the reboot, because apparently the Devil May Cry series needed a reboot. It's a strange set of circumstances that led to this game's existence. DMC4 sold around 3 million copies, which, according to some Japanese business executive seated atop his ivory tower, wasn't enough. So they decided that they needed to make the next game appeal to more Western audiences. Which is why they brought on Ninja Theory, who previously developed Heavenly Sword and Enslaved Odyssey to the West, the latter of which was very well received, mostly because of its story. I'll try and spare you all the nitty-gritty at the start, but if you know anything about this game's relationship with the fanbase of the original series, then you know it's rocky at best. But was it really given a fair chance? Let's find out. The claims in the intro still stand. DMC is quick to get right into the action, and boy, the action is real good. The controls are fluid, the animation's flashy, the enemies, who are plentiful in number and rich in variety, are satisfying to defeat. The soundtrack is bumpin' and the pacing is spot on. The combat just feels good, and considering that this is a Devil May Cry game, that's all I really ask for. And the cherry on top is the art design, which for the most part is truly something special. All the levels are creative, even the ones where you're put into a generic city manage to be good because the game establishes early on that Dante often gets dragged into limbo, which is a parallel world of sorts that has a tendency to both fall apart and attempt to murder you. This makes the world itself literally against you, and naturally leads into satisfying platforming with the use of your two grappling hooks. One used to pull things towards you and the other to pull you to the thing, which can be used in combat as well. This is a good replacement for Nero's Devilbringer from DMC4, giving you even more control over how the battle flows. You get upgrade points from killing enemies in battle, which you can spend at divinity statues to gradually max out your moveset with all the weapons, of which there's a good variety. You have angel weapons, which are fast and good for dealing with large groups of foes, and demon weapons, which are heavier and more damaging, good for dealing with bigger enemies. And of course there's Dante's Rebellion Sword, which balances out the two extremes. Some enemy types can only be hurt by either angel or demon weapons, which, while it can be annoying sometimes, forces you to mix up your combos and get more familiar with your arsenal. For the first time in the series, you are also able to point the camera wherever you please, which is a personal godsend for me. As far as I'm concerned, the gameplay portion of DMC is fantastic and builds off everything learned from the whole series thus far. It thankfully was not quick to forget the gameplay principles that have been developed over 18 years, but it includes enough fresh ideas to distinguish itself not just visually but in terms of how it plays as well. Overall, the game part of the game is great, except for, well, it's too easy. At this point, I can't even act surprised considering more games in the series are too easy than the ones that are sufficiently difficult. And when a Japanese executive says to make it appeal to Western audiences, that basically translates into dumb it down. But even by those standards, it just doesn't demand enough from the player. This is because of the overhauled ranking system, which previously took a lot of hard work to achieve a good letter grade at the end of a level or even in the moment-to-moment combat. This has been drastically changed. Now the ranking system is all too eager to hand out S's like alms for the poor. Get this, on my initial playthrough there was only one mission that I didn't get an S rank on, and even then it was an A. This should not be happening. It almost feels insulting when I die multiple times, use healing items, and generally suck in combat, but still somehow achieve an S rank every single time. The game seemed to get harder as I went forward, but I'm not sure if because it was actually getting harder or if it was because I just stopped caring because I knew I was going to get an S rank at the end of the mission anyways. I'm not even sure of the level of suckery required to get a B, C, or D rank. I've I've never even come close to getting one. Forget handing out participation trophies, this is like handing out participation grand prizes. Granted, there are now 2 ranks above S, but even those are easy to achieve simply by accident. I can understand the sentiment of making the game easier for newcomers. Heck, DMC 1 and 3 are downright intimidating with their difficulty, but making the ranking system this forgiving is just going too far, and I can certainly understand why some of the more hardcore players would be upset by this. But to be honest, the hardcore fans had their claws out for this game before it was even released, simply because of the art style change. The first trailer received so much backlash they had to go and rewrite and redesign Dante to make him seem just a tad bit more similar to the original one, but that didn't stop developers from being harassed, which led to media outlets attacking the entire fanbase, which of course just led to more hatred towards the game. But let's try and ignore all the external controversy and instead focus on all the stuff you should be critical of. The story elements aren't great.
Your point?
Meningitis is a human affliction.
And it's hard to tell whether it's Ninja Theory's fault or Capcom corporate for forcing them too far in the direction of something an edgy 13-year-old would find cool. But whoever you decide to point the finger at, it is what it is.
Doesn't smell too good.
The game starts with the big baddie giving a monologue about what an evil and powerful CEO he is, and the message already isn't subtle at all.
Friday it is then. You have a good night, Mr. President.
It's not so much a political agenda as it is an insincere shoved-in narrative about how addicted society is to corporate products and how big companies and right-wing news outlets control the world and how we're all oblivious to it. I guess to appeal to the younger, more hip American audience. It's annoying and unnecessary and completely hypocritical considering why this game exists in the first place. And the new Dante is the epitome of obnoxiousness, cursing every other word and generally being a big old douche. This time around his backstory is that he's half angel and half demon. You can almost hear the writer saying, "Our Dante's way cooler." The problem isn't that he's different, the problem is that he's the complete opposite of everything the original Dante was, and as a beloved classic iconic game character, that justifiably makes people mad. The original Dante bled genuine charisma, nothing about him felt forced. This Dante is too edgy, and any attempts at charisma or jokes or general coolness like the original games pulled off is borderline cringy.
I just seem to drag on forever. Church.
He comes off more as someone who's just insecure about his masculinity. The least you could say is that they tried too hard. And that doesn't even begin to cover how they butchered Virgil's character. Virgil is just lame. He was one of the best video game villains ever made, and they turned him into elite hacksaw who wears something that looks far too much like a fedora, electing to hide from enemies until Dante comes and saves him rather than fight them himself. And he only gets more unlikable as the game continues, which is fitting because he turns out to be the bait-and-switch final boss after he and Dante realize they have a slight difference in perspective, but they didn't do nearly enough to set him up as any sort of antagonist, in so much they released DLC to explain how this guy could ever be considered a good villain for a potential sequel. The final member of the main cast is Kat, spelled with a K of course. She's an alright character and a good motivation for Dante, much better than Kyrie, that's for sure, but she doesn't really stand on her own 2 feet. She starts off pretty good, then devolves into a whiny, useless ball of tears by the end. Not the sort of character progression you would expect. Speaking of character progression, Dante does become a better person by the end, but again, it's too on the nose. Subtlety and nuance are not something this game does well. The plot elements are pretty simplistic. It's trying quite hard to have the Hollywood blockbuster aesthetic, and that bleeds into the story. While the effort put into the cinematics, visuals, and acting is downright inspiring, the writing, unfortunately, isn't so good. The actors are doing their darndest to make it come off as natural, but it still sounds strange. Again, they're going for the Hollywood blockbuster aesthetic, so the story hits all the main beats you've seen 1,000 times over. But despite that, I actually think the story isn't half bad. I enjoy the way it actually explains how its universe works, unlike the originals, which dropped you in the middle of it and expected you to just accept things how they were. And I like how it builds up the relationship between the characters, who, despite the flawed interpretation of the originals, aren't horrible, and there are plenty of creative ideas mixed in there. Again, the production quality is top-notch, the acting is good, and there aren't any glaring plot holes or inconsistencies. Make no mistake, the original Resident Evil has a bad story.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
This game has a flawed story.
I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better looking.
There is a difference, but I understand why people hate this game when compared to the original series.
And I got a bigger dick.
However you feel about the story and characters, I think you'd have to make a pretty strong argument to say the gameplay doesn't hold up, and there's plenty of extra content once you've beaten the game. So while I understand the initial backlash, I still don't see any solid reason to continue to hate this reboot, especially now that the fans of the original series are getting exactly what they want. And you know, it's exactly what I want too. Part of the malice towards this game stems from the perception at the time that this was going to replace the original series, and that was definitely a justifiable worry. But now we're getting a proper sequel to DMC4, and it'll probably end the story once and for all. And I really wouldn't mind seeing a direct sequel to capital D lowercase m capital C Devil May Cry. The story basically ends on a cliffhanger, and there's a lot of untapped potential that I'd love to see realized. Hopefully once DMC5 is done and gone, Capcom will consider continuing this storyline, and there's plenty of reason to. Despite the hardcore fanbase generally hating this game, the majority of people seem to like it, and I happen to be in that particular camp. It has plenty of flaws, but overall the experience was compelling enough to leave me wanting more. And with that, I finally finished the DMC series from Devil May Cry to Devil May Cry. The release date for Devil May Cry 5 simply can't come quick enough. My name is Javik, and I hope we meet again.
Give him a little taste of the good shit!